Hey everybody, and Tony here with my review of Strauss's Elektra with conductor Markus Poschner, which I saw at the Staatsoper unter den Linden. This marks the third time I saw this production of Elektra by Patrice Chéreau, because this was Waltraud Meier's second to the last performance as Klytämnestra in her entire opera career. And as much as I would have loved to see the final performance, it was sold out. So this second to the last performance totally sufficed. It should come off as no surprise that I have been admiring Waltraud Meier for many years, ever since I was a young teenager, and I still admire her to this day as an adult. Sure, listening to her a lot more critically, I started to notice some vocal flaws, such as woofiness and the shrillness when she hits her top notes, and sometimes her chest tones tend to be kind of hollow. Though she can have chest tones on a good day, but there are times that her chest tones can be kind of on the inaudible side. But I could totally forgive whatever vocal flaws Waltraud Meier has, regardless of what she sings. Whether she sang Isolde or Kundry, Ortrud, or even Klytämnestra, those vocal flaws that she's been having can be easily forgiven, because I've always loved her as a committed and absolutely fine, elegant, and intricate stage actress, let alone singing actress. When it comes to the roles that I've been hearing Waltraud Meier as, Klytämnestra is a really mixed bag for me. On the one hand, I really love her dedication to the text and how she was able to understand the original mythology of this character, given that Klytämnestra was a tragic figure whose marriage was unhappy. Her family life was equally unhappy. She was still elegant because she's also Helen of Troy's sister, and she had to contend with a husband who unfortunately raped her, and she also had to deal with the fact that her husband also sacrificed her eldest daughter, Iphigenia, to the gods, just so that Agamemnon could have a victory against his opponents. And what does he do after he comes home from war? Bring in Cassandra, the prophetess, as his concubine, which unfortunately led Klytämnestra and her lover Aegisthus to murder Agamemnon in his bath. So I could definitely give Frau Meier a lot of credit where credit is due in terms of thoroughly understanding the psyche, the emotional tragedy, and the overall circumstances that Klytämnestra has to contend with as a tragic heroine and a still elegant queen. So I could give her a lot of huge high marks for that. On the other hand, there are times that, as I said before, her vocal flaws cannot be denied. Yes, she did have some chest tones, and they were reliable ones at that. Yes, she was able to still sing well, but singing well as Klytämnestra is only half the battle, because Waltraud Meier's voice is not one that I would associate with Klytämnestra, because as I stated before, Klytämnestra is originally a contralto role. And also, let's not forget that the first Klytämnestra was, of course, a contralto, Ernestine Schumann-Heink. And if you know me, I love my contraltos as Klytämnestra. Whether it be Frau Schumann-Heink or Gusta Hammer, Res Fischer, Lydia Kinderman, Jean Madeira, Regina Resnick, or even that of Karin Brancel, Kerstin Torborg, and Else Schürhoff, Klytämnestra really needs a deep, dark, chesty, and round and rich contralto voice to make her voice strong and powerful all the way through, especially with those chest tones. And it also says something when former Brunhildes, such as Anna von Mildenburg, Martha Mödel, Astrid Varnay, and even a former Sieglinde in the form of Leonie Rizanek, and lest I forget the complete powerhouse who was Christa Ludwig, and lest I forget about Sona Chervena and Annie Schlemm, who were all reliable mezzos or even former sopranos who had equally reliable and dark chest tones to make Klytämnestra come alive, especially Astrid Varnay, who I still adore to this day. But regardless of whatever vocal caveats Waltraud Meier had as Klytämnestra, whether it be the shrill high notes, the chest tones which tended to be all over the place in terms of fullness and richness, and the hollowness that she tended to have, those flaws can be forgiven because she was still a dedicated singing actress who was able to bring in a lot of nuance, tragedy, and dimension to this otherwise antagonistic character. So I still have to give my hat off to Waltraud Meier for bringing in such a dedicated and stirring performance as Klytämnestra, vocal flaws and all. The one singer who has been improving since I first heard her as Chrysothemis was none other than Vida Miknevičiūtė. When I first heard her in the role, I used to think her voice was a bit too light for Chrysothemis, but 4 years on, and her vocal condition improved, because I also saw her 6 months ago as Salome at the Deutsche Oper Berlin, and even though that role was not the greatest fit for her, I argue that Chrysothemis is a much better fit for Vida Miknevičiūtė. She still has those gleaming, glistening, shimmering top notes, a tone that is well coordinated throughout all the registers, and a timbre that was silvery, shimmering, and well projected all throughout the theater with a lot of dimension, nuance, clarity, and most of all, sufficient power that helped her carry herself over the orchestra. One could wish for a little bit more steel, richness, roundness, and way more volume, especially considering that Chrysothemis is also a dramatic soprano role, almost akin to Abigail from Nabucco, Lady Macbeth from Macbeth, and even Puccini's Tosca from Tosca, and lest I forget about Leonora de Vargas from La Forza del Destino and Amelia from Un ballo in maschera. I will never ever forget voices such as Göthe Ljungberg, Maria Hussa, Dorothee Mansky, Wanda Axel Clemens, Walburga Wegner, Frances Yiend, Luba Velic, Gladys Kuchta, Marianne Schech, Hedwig Müller-Bütow, Sif Eriksdotter, Dorothy Dow, and my number one favorite Chrysothemis of all time, Leonie Rizanek, whose roundness, richness, and sheer power in the top notes definitely defined her as one of the greatest Chrysothemises of all time. Yes, Vida Miknevičiūtė lacked that additional metal, steel, roundness, richness, and overall additional dimension, let alone dramatic dimension needed for Chrysothemis. But her peerless dedication as a singer, her absolutely peerless technique, and her overall great strengths as a fine lyric soprano who managed to hit all those notes so beautifully and with great coordination can never be trivialized, nor can they ever be questioned. And although her voice could be way more suitable to Arabella, Liu, Mimi, Sura Angelica, and Alice Ford, and even Desdemona from Otello, I could still give Vida Magnificuta a lot of credit for what she was able to accomplish as Chrysothemis, given that she has improved by a huge mile, and I applaud her with all of my heart. Ricarda Merbeth is still an extremely mixed bag as Elektra. It should be no surprise that Merbeth was always a lyric soprano from when she started all the way up to the late 2000s. And if there's one role in Elektra that she was good at, it was none other than Chrysothemis, and there's no problem seeing Chrysothemis for a long time. Just ask Leonie Rizanek. She sang Chrysothemis for nearly 30 plus years before transitioning to Klytaemnestra in the late 80s, and she was a definitely great Chrysothemis at that. The problem I've had with Ricarda Merbeth singing Elektra, as well as all of these big dramatic soprano roles, is that she tended to resort to screaming. She tended to resort to spreading her mouth wide open so that she could let her voice out with abandon. And that's not what you want for any true dramatic soprano. And there are also times that I feel that she lacks that additional metal, roundness, richness, darkness, steel, and overall clarion and blazing lightning-like clarity that are needed for Elektra. Perhaps I'm just extremely spoiled by my favorite choices for Elektra, especially when it comes to such sopranos, let alone former mezzos, turned sopranos such as Helena Wildbrunn, Gertrud Rünger, Annika Netzny, Helena Braun, Erna Schlüter, Astrid Varnay, Gerda Lammers, Ludmila Vorakova, and Nadezhda Kniplova, unless I forget about Isolde Eichlep. And if I wanted sopranos who had blazing top notes and equally blazing, lightning-like, and spear-like, sword-like high Cs, I would never go wrong with Christel Goltz, Rose Pauli, Birgit Nilsson, and Inge Borch. And if we're talking the complete package, at least in my opinion, I could never go wrong with Ingrid Stega and Danica Mastilovic, at least to some people. But when it comes to my favorite Elektras, I could never go wrong with the likes of Annika Netzny, Helena Braun, Erna Schlüter, Astrid Varnay, Ludmila Vorakova, Nadezhda Kniplova, and of course, Gwyneth Jones. What more can I say about those ladies? They had round and rich voices, dark voices, especially in Annika Netzny's, Helena Braun's, and Erna Schlüter's cases, and of course, my most favorite dark voice Elektra being Astrid Varnay in her prime in the 50s. And you can never go wrong with Birgit Nilsson's top notes when she launches at them. When Ricarda Merbeth attempts to launch at her top notes, there are times that she resorts to screaming, which causes a huge imbalance in her middle notes and some of her chest tones. And yes, speaking of her middle notes and chest tones, she did manage to coordinate them a little bit better than she did 4 years ago, but it's not enough to convince me. And it's still a voice that should have stayed as a full lyric / spinto soprano singing Chrysothemis or the Empress, or even roles like Tosca or Arabella. There's nothing wrong with having a career with those type of roles for a long time. And as I stated before, I'm still very conflicted with Ricarda Merbeth as Elektra, because although she could sing the role and act the role with abandon, her singing left a lot to be desired in terms of what I would really love for a true and real Elektra. at least I could still give her credit for her overall commitment as a stage actress who was able to bring in a lot of mania to the role. And even though I was not a huge fan of her singing, she was still able to imbue some moments with tenderness, but it was not really enough to salvage the entire performance. I am not so crazy about Stefan Rügema as Aegeist because he is, as to be expected, a character tenor singing this role, and I am not a fan of character tenors or buffo tenors singing Aegeist. His voice was still nasal, it was still kind of unattractive. He still managed to sing the role with abandon, but it was still not enough to convince me, because whenever I think of Aegeist, I think of real Heldentenors, such as Gunnar Graurud, Ramon Vinay, Hans Beira, who is actually my number one favorite Aegeist of all time, and even Max Lorenz and Seth Svanholm. Those were real Heldentenors with stronger tones and way more exciting instruments, and even though they were not Heldentenors themselves, I could also never go wrong with Helmut Melchert and Fritz Uhl, who were also able to be strong singing actors and who were in a way sort of on the Spinto line, especially when it came to singing all of Aegeist's music. And aside from Hans Beira, I could never go wrong with James King, who was a totally complete musician in that said role. With Stefan Rügema, he fell short of the vocal demands to be expected from Aegeist, but he was still a decent singing actor all the way through, even though I'm not really a huge fan of his voice in such a thankless character. Lauri Vazar was actually quite decent as Orest. Yes, his voice had sufficient depth. It was a solidly deep instrument, but there were times that he tended to be quite bland in his singing, and there were times that he had a wobble, but he still had that nice depth that I like in any bass baritone, let alone low baritone, singing Orest. However, I still miss the true depth, richness, and deep, dark core that I love in true baritones such as Paul Schöffler, Hans Hotter, Hermann Ude, and even Thomas Stewart. Those were real bass baritones with deep tones. And lest I forget about Franz Krass, who is also another favorite singer of Orest, and even to some extent Theo Adam. Although you can argue that my favorite Orests of all time have always been Paul Schöffler, Hans Hotter, Ferdinand Franz, and Hermann Ude, because they had deep, dark, rich, cavernous tones that were imposing and strong, and lest I even forget about Tomislav Neralic, who was also just as imposing, strong, and powerful. With Lauri Vazar, he kind of lacked that additional power, darkness, and dimension, but he was still an involving stage actor, and he was able to make the best out of this mysterious brother figure, and he managed to do a fine and decent job all the way through. So among the main singers, I still have to give my hat off to Waltraud Meier and Vida Meknevichute for jobs superbly done in terms of Waltraud Meier's dedication as an overall stage artist, and Vida Meknevichute showing fine and peerless technique as Chrysothemis. My hat definitely goes off to those two, and I salute them for all their efforts. The singing of the smaller parts were equally just as fine all the way through. With the men, we have Olaf Ber's strongly acted old servant, although his voice showed wear and tear and a bit of nasality and not enough depth and darkness for a true basso profondo a la Kurt Böhme, because Olaf Ber is a baritone, but he was still able to act the part well. David Wakeham sufficiently round, rich, and finally sung Tutor, who was able to make the best out of this father figure to Orest, even though he lacked that additional depth and darkness to be found in Gustav Neidlinger and Joseph Greindl, but I digress. David Wakeham was still able to do a superb job as Orest's tutor, and Siabonga Makungo, who was able to use his light lyric tenor voice that had a lot of character, sufficient charm, and a lot of youthfulness to bring the young servant to life, although he best be careful that he does not end up nasal in his singing and continue to develop his core, because this is a fine young tenor that I would love to see grow and grow with every role that he will sing in the future and that he continues to sing. So the men managed to do fine jobs with their respective roles in the smaller parts, and so did the singers of the Overseer and the Five Maids. Yes, Cheryl Studer was past her prime as the Overseer. She kind of lacked that additional fire, fierceness, metal, and to some extent richness and depth that is necessary for the Overseer. And if you know me, I love it when a mezzo-soprano sings the Overseer, especially when she's got great blazing top notes, a la Bella Pallen, Olga Sönie, Charlotte Berthold, Margareta Hintermeyer, and my personal favorite, Margaret Rogero, because they all had focused mezzo-soprano voices and clarion tops. But in terms of what Cheryl Studer accomplished as the Overseer, she was still a decent singing actress, although her voice was not really that fierce, let alone fiery and strong and imposing for the Overseer. I'm still missing that additional imposing quality for the Overseer, which sadly Cheryl Studer was deficient in, although once upon a time she was a fine Chrysothemis, which arguably was a role better suited for her. But as for Madame Studer as the Overseer, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but she was still a capable singing actress who was able to give it her all, although her voice was not really totally fit for a role that requires imposing singing, fierce singing, and dramatic singing. Bonita Hyman, what more can you expect from Bonita Hyman? She used her chesty, strong, and imposing contralto voice to make the first maid come to life, full of dimension and full of strength all the way through. And she definitely took advantage of those chest tones with everything she's got. Natalia Skritska's superbly focused and absolutely fine second maid, although she could use a lot more chestiness and a lot more strength. Katarina Kamaloha's charisma as the third maid, although she had the tendency to be quite thin in her intonation and a bit strident, because when I think of my personal favorite singers for the third maid, I think of Sieglinde Wagner and Rohangis Yachmi, who were able to be chestier and stronger, but Katarina Kamaloha was still a fine and dedicated singing actress all the way through, with a tone that was quite pliable at best. Anna Zamwil was vocally better as the fourth maid in stark comparison to her performance as Marianne Leitmetzerin 6 months ago, because she was still able to take fine advantage of her top notes, and she was also able to use her skills as a singing actress to such a fine degree, although there were vocally fuller fourth maids that could be found in Daga Söderqvist, Marlies Ziemeling, and even Lucine Amara and Milkana Nikolova, but I totally digress. Anna Zamwil was still a dedicated singing actress who was able to bring the fourth maid to life, and Roberta Alexander was still able to be vocally strong and beautiful as the fifth maid, using her superb full lyric soprano voice to make her voice shimmer with everything she's got, and using her great sense of musicality to make the fifth maid worth listening to. So overall, the singing did vary in quality, but I still have to give my hat off to Waltraud Meier and Vida Magnevichute for doing great jobs in carrying tonight's performance of Elektra, especially Waltraud Meier, given that this is her second to the last performance as Klytämnestra before she ends up retiring from her operatic career. It's still a superbly acted and finely sung interpretation of Klytämnestra, and it's not just Waltraud Meier who is able to carry the show from everybody's feet, but also the five maids plus the overseer. And I could definitely forgive Cheryl Studer being past her prime as the overseer because she was still able to act the part well. And when it comes to having five extremely reliable singers as the maids in Bonita Hyman, Natalia Skritska, Katarina Kammerloher, Anna Samuel, and Roberta Alexander, you can never ever go wrong with these five singers. Whether it be Bonita Hyman's strong contralto voice, Natalia Skritska's solidly toned and strong mezzo-soprano voice, Katarina Kammerloher's pliable yet somewhat thin and charismatic mezzo-soprano voice, Anna Samuel's continuous dedication as a singing actress, even throwing caution to the wind when she launches at her high notes, and Roberta Alexander's peerless musicianship as the fifth maid. So what more can you ask for, especially when Waltraud Meier was carrying tonight's performance and even helped by Vida Magnevichute on her side as Chrysothemis. The conducting done by Markus Poschner was fine all the way through. Yes, it was on the fast side, but I wasn't complaining about the tempo. It was fast when it needed to be, and it kept my blood pumping, although I could ask for a little bit more nuance, a little bit more sharpness in some areas, and some more lushness in the lush areas, because there were times that I felt like it was a bit muddy in some areas. It was sometimes rushed. It was sometimes just too pasted together when they should have been a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more varied in terms of how he was conducting, but he still did a fine job all the way through. And the chorus and the orchestra of the Staatsoper unter den Linden have been reliable as always. And lest I forget about the players of the servants, Luisa Hagedise Bernburg, Anne Ernst, Inge von Krotnaurer, Lea Lechler, Julia Lerch, Bruna Sandow, Jana Schlender, Verena Allertz, Minjo von Blomberg, Olga Wilenskaya, Konstanze Löwe, Stephanie Safransky, and Anne Volt, who were able to do fine jobs as the servants of the palace. So overall, while I did have mixed opinions about Waltraud Meier's vocal performance as Klytämnestra, she was still able to give it her all theatrically. Given that this is her second to the last performance before she ends up retiring from her operatic career, I could still give my hat off to her. Who knew that her career that spanned for nearly 48 years, let alone 50 years, was something completely eventful in everything that she's been doing thus far, for better or for worse. And her performance as Klytämnestra proved that she was a fine singing actress. I could continue to forgive Waltraud Meier of whatever vocal shortcomings she had, because she has always been a dedicated and unparalleled singing actress who gave it her all. And there were occasions where she threw caution to the wind, and she did so in her own way, and she did it in her own style, and the results were nothing more than laudable. And for those of you who caught this performance of Strauss's Elektra at the Staatsoper unter den Linden, what'd you think of it? Did you enjoy Waltraud Meier's performance as Klytämnestra? Are you anticipating her final performance in this role, especially for those of you who have booked a ticket to see her final performance as Klytaemnestra on the 20th of October? And are you very excited for that as well? Or do you feel like the role of Klytaemnestra was not really suitable for her? Please comment below and let me know. Well, that's it for my review of Strauss's Elektra at the Staatsoper unter den Linden, starring Waltraud Meier as Klytaemnestra. Tune in tomorrow for my review of Verdi's Aida, also at the Staatsoper unter den Linden, starring Elina Garancia as Amneris and Marina Rebecca as Aida, with the production being from the ever-controversial Calixto Vieto. So until then, good night, everybody, and happy Halloween season!